Maybe don't know.
So, rule number one, don't get injured. Rule number two, train smart. So there's a lot of those kind of fundamental rules for older climbers. Nutrition and sleep is massively important.
This time power. This time to build power. This time to build power. This time to build power.
What's up, everybody? I'm your host, Chris Hampton. Welcome to the Power Company Podcast, brought to you by PowerCompanyClimbing.com. Obviously, you've already seen the title of this episode, so you know that today we're talking to a climbing coaching legend. And if you're here because you're also interested in coaching, I've recently released a coaching course that you should check out, Coaching for Mastery. It's the result of several years of figuring out where the research, theory, and my own experience into helping climbers better learn skills overlaps, and then synthesizing it all into practical application. You can find the link in your show notes to learn all about it. Okay. Today's guest is Eric Hörst. I've known Eric for many years, but I've known his work for far longer, and he deserves credit for being one of the earliest sources of good information for training for climbing that existed. If you're interested in training and coaching climbers and you haven't come across his work, where the hell have you been? Eric stopped by my house to discuss his own recent climbing and what he's found that's working for him in his late 50s. He's been crushing, and where he hopes to go with his climbing in the coming years and what he thinks might get him there. Eric is so often giving out information through his books, website, and podcast, information that helps us. And I think this is a rare look into his climbing and what he's learning from it. All right, let's get into it.
It's time to build.
I haven't told you a thing about what I want to talk about yet.
Okay, yeah.
Because
we can just ad-lib.
Yeah, because I kind of just want to compare notes.
Okay.
You've been crushing lately. It's been really fun to watch this uptick in your climbing and in the things that you're doing and your excitement in getting outside. And I'm sure some of that came with the boys going off and doing their own things.
Correct.
But I'm also curious about what you've been doing to prepare. I'm a few years behind you, so I get to learn from what you're doing that's working from you or for you for my years coming. So
yeah, it's an interesting topic. And, our sport is one where you can stay engaged and involved and performing at a high level very deep into your adult life, into middle age or beyond. And, so my mission, probably like yours and a lot of folks, is to continue to be a climber as long as possible. And, injury is one of the things that can absolutely shut you down, especially if it's a knee or a hip or a shoulder or something that, is really, game changing. Most of those injuries you can come back from when you're young, but sometimes when you're old, it doesn't happen. And there's a reason there's only one football player in the NFL in their 40s, Tom Brady, because the rest just couldn't keep it together long enough. And that's kind of how climbing is. We see people drop by the wayside for various reasons, motivation lacks, their life changes, family, career. There's a lot of things that can get in the way.
Yep.
But on the other hand, you can always circle back to climbing if you have that off time. And so the one thing you need is a healthy body. And so that's kind of my overriding goal, is just to avoid injury and keep going.
So what are you going to do while you're here in Lander if you're trying to avoid injury?
Yeah, that's a good question. This is the 30th anniversary of my first visit to Lander back in the summer of 1992. Of course, Wild Iris was unknown to the world. Only Todd and his few friends were climbing there. And I get a phone call. He's like, Eric, you got to come check out this limestone area in Lander. And so we came out that summer, did a few first ascents out there, and we've been coming back most summers since. And I commented to a few people this year that the routes that I haven't done in all of those years are routes I'm kind of afraid to get on
Yeah.
right now because they're like 513 BC kind of
Mhm.
climbs that are steep and small, tweaky pockets and
Yep.
so I think twice before getting on those routes, or I get on them and I hang a lot, and I'm afraid to fully commit. And that's not a mindset you can climb hard. You have to fully commit,
Yep.
on powerful routes like that. And so I think like any aging athlete, you have to kind of pick your battles. And I know routes that say like at 10 Sleep, where I was just at for a few days, less overhanging, you can stand on your feet more, and that right there makes it a little more friendly
Mhm.
of a climbing area for an aging climber. But that said, prior to 10 Sleep, I was at Rifle, which is steep and burly, but the holds are generally bigger and more friendly. You're
Right.
wrapping your hands and palming corners and
Mhm.
grabbing underclings, and it's not the mono or two-finger pocket pulling that you often encounter on harder routes at the Iris. So yeah, I try to be very self-aware of what's going on and listen to the signals from my body.
Yeah, I think that's so important. In the last like 5 or 6 years, I've been mostly bouldering and, really with the motivation of like bucking the trend of we can't get stronger, we can't get more powerful as we get older. And I've climbed harder and harder, but I'm definitely butting up against this ceiling where it's like there are some things out there that are harder that I know I could do, but there's the specter of injury from either some like really intense heel hook or intense shoulder move or something like that's holding me back from committing, just like you said. And I'm just not willing to, destroy a year of climbing to try to do this one thing. I would rather take another step back if I have to and climb for longer.
Yeah. Yeah. And I respect that you're pushing in the bouldering because that's something I have not done. Now, I should put out there where I live in Pennsylvania, there's just not any great bouldering. There's these diabase boulders that are kind of cool and of local interest, but it's not Bishop, it's not Waco, it's not even the bouldering, that you would find in Wyoming or Colorado. So it's not an inspiring bouldering scene generally in eastern Pennsylvania. So there's not much to go after. But I prefer rope climbing. I think that's where I can still excel. However, I do believe where I'm at, kind of Coach Hörst coaching himself. I tell myself I am being held back by my inability to do hard moves. Even at Rifle, a couple of routes I was on a few weeks ago, I have the fitness for the routes. I just can't do a couple of moves. I need a little more power. And, just because I can hang on a 20 millimeter with one hand in the gym, it's not the same as applying that, on the rock where your feet are on and you have to connect your hands and feet powerfully.
Yep.
And, to a large degree, you need to boulder to do that, or you have to system wall. I mean, that's why system walls are so effective. And so I guess Coach Hörst could take, maybe learn a thing or two from Coach Hampton in terms of maybe going out there and trying to explore. Maybe this winter, I throw around in my head, what if I did go to Waco for 2 weeks and test the waters, and could I not only hopefully have some fun and send some boulders, but would that then feed back into my spring season being perhaps a little better? Because right now, I don't think I've ever been as fit in terms of climbing specific aerobic energy system. The beginning of December, kind of the end of my climbing season last year, in a matter of a few days, I sent Flower Power and Bohica, which, they're only 513Bs, but them, you've climbed them. They're very much classic resistance routes. And so, for me, that was evidence that at my age, I had pretty high aerobic fitness. But what would it take for me to then turn sending those routes into a couple of their neighbor routes.
Right.
Like you did a number of years ago.
Yep.
To do Transworld, I need to do harder moves.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah. I think that's a really important distinction, number one. But I also want to back up and just say one of the interesting things I found when I had my shoulder surgery at 40 was that when I was coming back, bouldering actually felt safer to me. And this was a little counterintuitive. I expected sport climbing to feel safer, especially in the red. But what I found was that I have this gear that I go into sport climbing where I just like lunge for things and latch and hold, and that felt really dangerous for my shoulder multiple times. Whereas with bouldering, I'm close to the ground. I can just drop off if I get into a situation like that. And I already had this like hang on for dear life mentality, sport climbing.
Yeah.
So I think, in that respect, I love your idea of go to Waco for a little while and test the waters, see how it is, because it's so easy to just drop off if you want to. And there's so many things close to the ground. You don't have to do giant high balls,
Right. Yeah. I have no interest in jumping off from 10 or 20 feet up.
No way.
Because my back can't take that stuff.
No.
And, and so, yeah, I'm apprehensive, but I kind of think I need to give it a try because, if I am in the coming years going to take it up one more notch, in terms of sending a 14A. I think I need to be able to do harder moves. I mean, you could tell me better. I mean, what's the hardest move in Transworld?
Probably V8.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's, unless you find the absolute perfect route for you, I think that's probably bare minimum for climbing 514.
Right.
At least what I've seen is being able to do a good variety of V8 sort of climbing. Question for you. I know that you went through a period, maybe in your early 50s, I'm not sure about the timeline, where you weren't able to climb a lot, weren't able to train a lot. And since then, you've been able to spin up your fitness, your climbing fitness really effectively. So that came from that older age already. So I'm curious to know, just for the older athletes out there who are listening, what was your sort of starting point for where you're at now? Obviously, you'd already had this skill built up, but...
Yeah, well, I mean, I've been at this a long time. I started climbing in 1977.
Right.
And so, when you do something for 45 years, not every year is going to build on the previous. There's going to be, an ebb and flow of your motivation, of your time available to train and climb, and consequently your skill. Well, not so much your skill level, because, climbing is something where we accumulate a skill set and it kind of stays with you.
Yeah.
But in terms of your climbing fitness and what you can actually do on the rock, there's going to be an ebb and flow. And so, when we started our family, 21 years ago, that's a big one. And anybody who has, kids, especially those first 5 or 10 years, it takes a lot of time and effort, especially if you're going to be engaged as a parent, as I was.
Yep.
And so we were definitely climbing a lot less, for a number of years, though. We have a big home training facility. I never got out of shape. And I guess that's the first thing I would tell people if they're going into one of those midlife phases where career or family is going to limit their climbing. Stay in shape.
Yep.
Because, just stopping climbing and kind of letting your, physical fitness, drop significantly. Yeah, you can dig out of that hole, but it's tougher,
and stay in climbing shape. I think there's some semblance of climbing shape.
Right. I mean, there's
important.
never been a year that I haven't climbed significantly, at least 30 or 40 days, even in one of those down phases. And most of those years, if we want to talk about harder climbing, I climbed my first 513 in 1987.
Diamond
So what-
Life, is that
Diamond
right?
Life. Yeah, it was our first
Yeah.
descent at the New River Gorge. It was actually the first 513 at the New River Gorge.
Great
And so
route.
it was my first 513 and the New's first 513. And so that was 35 years ago. And I think pretty much every year since then, I've climbed 513, at least one. Some years, a lot more than one. And so, but yeah, as the kids got like into high school age and we're, beginning that transition into doing more of their stuff, not with my wife and I, and certainly the last couple of years since the kids went off to college and we're empty nesters, this is kind of my, I don't know what you want to call it, but it's kind of my chance to kind of, put myself first when it comes to climbing performance. Because, when my wife and I would be out climbing with our kids the last 15 years, we put their goals and their fun and joy at the crags ahead of our desires. And so it's hard to work a project if you're out playing your kids and trying to make their day the best it can be. And so we're now able to kind of return the focus onto us and travel to the areas that we're interested in. And, I have, a goal to climb hard well into my 60s. So that's the game plan right now.
Yeah.
And so I guess kind of the bottom line, back to your question is, I even when you aren't able to travel and be as involved as a climber, just to not lose it physically, get way out of shape and to give yourself the ability to climb a couple days a month, let's say, go for runs, walks, anything to stay active.
Yeah, it doesn't take a whole lot to keep the getting unhealthy and unfit at bay.
You bet. And I mean, someone can engage a coach and with a hangboard, be able to stay in decent shape and go out for a few runs and keep their body comp close. And it doesn't take much to stay in the game. Now, to climb your very best obviously takes a bigger commitment.
Yeah. So you recently retired, which I'm sure, well, first off, congratulations. I'm sure
it's been over 2 years. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm sure that was, a benefit to your climbing, but then you've also got this new business that seems to be booming. So has that evened things out, or is it, are you working more now that it's your own business? How's that going?
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of what it turns into. But and you know how that is. When you have a growing business, you always are going to underestimate what it takes.
Yeah.
But yeah, I had a great career at a university in Pennsylvania, Millersville University. 32 years I put in. It was a wonderful job for me because it gave me the security, in terms of raising a family. And, it was essentially a 9-month-a-year job. So summers I had free to travel and to do my climbing stuff. And, and I'm kind of always been a workaholic, kind of the classic type A who's doing, 5 things at once and trying to do the best I can in each area. So what it did is, stepping away from the university, which actually happened to coincide with COVID and the university moving online, which is something that I wasn't happy about or didn't, that's not what I,
right. Not what you signed up for
originally.
Yeah,
working with students was what I signed up for. So none of the professors liked trying to take what's supposed to be an in-person instruction and try to make it happen online. So that was pure coincidence that it played out that way. But so it kind of gave me some freedom where I could be completely self-directed in terms of how I invest the hours and minutes of my life. But then again, I had this business, which I had launched 2 years prior to retiring, PhysiVantage Nutrition. And it started off as a tiny business. It was just my wife and I worked with a food scientist. We developed our first 2 products. We kind of got them tried and tested and proven with some pro climbers. And we launched back in the beginning of 2019. And then COVID hit, and, then everybody was just kind of scrambling. And, but the long story short is the business took off. And so right when I retired, I was at the point where I needed to fully commit to this business. And since it's grown exponentially the last 2 years, and now we're 4 years in, and we're a vibrant, growing business with 50 pro climbers in the U.S. using our products, thousands and thousands of weekend warriors and recreational climbers. And we just launched in Europe and have, European climbers getting the PhysiVantage as well. So it's growing to the point that I'm a little overwhelmed, to be honest, but that's a good thing.
Yeah. I mean, congrats on the business and the growth of it. Something I've found with my business, and maybe partially because it's in the climbing space like yours is that even though it's harder work and it's more work, and it can mean, work in the middle of the night or, work on weekends or whatever, it gives me more motivation to climb, whether it's because I'm interacting with other people who are psyched all the time to climb, or I'm motivated to be an example, be a mentor for other people in the space, whatever it is, I get a lot out of it in terms of motivation. And I thought I was really motivated when I was a weekend warrior, and I was, but I think it only grew when this became my full-time job. What's been your experience there?
No, I agree with that. And I think, what you're expressing is common amongst kind of more veteran athletes who are recognized in the community. And it's hard for you or me to perceive how many people we touch through what we do, through the podcasting, for instance, and through the training programs, and, just through personal contact at the Crags. For every one person who sends an email to you and says, hey, thanks, I really, this is game changing for me. There's probably 100 other people out there that feel the same way. And so that's pretty powerful endorsement of what people like you and I do, but also, I don't know. I think that I'm a believer that climbing is such a life-enriching, life-changing activity that, it's like the ultimate to have somebody then tell you that you made their experience even better or made their journey even better. And, last fall I was in Germany climbing with my son at the Frankenjura. And on a couple of occasions, I walked into a crag and people recognized me. So here I am halfway around the world and, oh my gosh, Eric Hörst. And, then they, compliment me on the book or the podcasts. And it's like, wow, that is so gratifying. It makes me feel so good. I mean, we don't get rich in the climbing business, not monetarily,
right?
But certainly that type of feedback is you can't put a price on it. That's life changing feedback.
Yeah, it's huge. It's one of the things that I never really expected when I was first dipping my toes into all of this, was that I would get as much joy from watching other people succeed who I had helped as I do from my own successes. And we'd love to get those emails, and we'd love to talk with people who are coming through town and show them the gym. And that stuff is so gratifying and means so much, and keeps me out there trying hard too.
Yeah. And, and I guess kind of as we age and stay active at the Crags, we become kind of evidence for other people. Like, I run into, like at Rifle, I'm working a 513A with, a couple of guys that are half my age. and you're like evidence to them that,
Yeah.
it's a long game.
Mm-hmm.
And, so many people feel like, oh, I need to reach this goal this summer or this season. And that's great to have that sense of urgency about your project. But I think climbers need to realize the climbing journey can be a really long one.
Yeah.
And so you don't have to, put all this pressure on yourself that it has to happen this week or this season or this month, because there's next season. For most people, there's going to be many more seasons to come.
Yeah.
And,
This is something I talk with clients about a lot, who are putting a lot of pressure on themselves, and anxiety is building up about what if I don't. However, as I'm getting older, we're all getting older. Are you starting to feel any of those like pressures of I have to get these things done sooner than later? And I'm asking because those things have certainly popped in my mind now and then, and I have to have that discussion with myself that yes, this is a long game, but at some point those big goals are off the table.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely do think about that. So while I try to communicate to that climber that's half my age that they have a long timeline to reach their goals and to continue to improve and to climb harder, the fact is, and it is a fact, I'm not going to climb 514 at age 70. It's just not likely to happen. I'm sure there's a guy somewhere in Spain that's done it.
Yeah,
but I don't know.
There must be.
But I don't know any in the U.S. I mean, Chuck Odette, 514A, and he's 65. So, I mean, there's some evidence there for me that I have maybe 7 years. Yeah, I do feel a little bit of pressure. And so it does make me kind of choose my travel and my projects. And, for instance, kind of the prime climbing season across much of the country is the autumn season, October, November. I'm going to spend it all on the red. I'm not going to go anywhere else. I kind of, I'm so sold on the fact that for me, at my age where I'm at, to break the next grade, I think the red's one of the best places for me to do it.
Absolutely.
Because it's more resistance climbing, less crux climbing. And there's other places. Certainly there'd be, Spain and, some other, locations as well. But the red is one that I love and enjoy. And so to kind of stack the deck in my favor, I'm building a cabin there.
Yep.
So 'cause then I have no excuses. Like if I actually live there, I can pick the days. And so the plan is for the next few falls, at least, to spend those 2 months at the red and, hopefully have lots of cool, dry days and, be able to tick some routes. So
I think that's super smart. And I think everybody can, to some degree, take that lesson of making, trending your lifestyle toward your goals, whatever it is. If you have the privilege like you and I have of being able to be in a location for a long time that's not your primary home, that's a great way to do it. Any way you can to lean your lifestyle in that direction, I think is really valuable.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, I think, something that's important to point out here. I think all climbers, if you're at it long enough, you kind of recognize when you go to an area, what the low-hanging fruit is and what routes play to your strengths. And, if you want to feel good and send something, a higher grade, you kind of pick things that cater to your strengths and you kind of shy away from things that might, reveal your weaknesses. And more and more as you get older, you have to kind of play that game. On the other hand, I think it's a mistake for younger climbers to do that a lot, and I tell my sons frequently. Now they're mostly self-directed and, coach themselves, but I give them input and hopefully they listen to some of it still, even though they're 19 and 21. And, and I frequently tell them, you guys need to do more. And I go down a tick list of things. You need to do more on-site climbing. You need to, mix it up, do more trad climbing and, because they're at that age where, they can still improve a lot, for the next 10 or 20 years, but they have to, invest some time into training up those weak areas. If they're always going out, picking things that are kind of in their wheelhouse, the quote low-hanging fruit, so to speak, that cater to their strength. Again, it's going to help them send their next 9A or whatnot, but it might not be what's going to help them get to the next grade.
Right,
you have to, spend some time doing things that kind of rough you up a little bit.
Yep.
And so I'm like, you need to go to rifle and get roughed up a little bit, or you need to, go here or there and do some on-site climbing and dial it back. And, but they're, they're young and they're enamored with the idea of trying to climb as hard as they can. And so, of course, they invest most of their time on, steep, powerful sport climbing, which is kind of what, they're
and
good.
They've got a lot of
enjoy.
time left. So, they'll listen to you someday, even if they don't when they're 19 and 21.
Yeah. Well, what you should do is you should sit them down and put a mic on them, Chris, and then you maybe get the truth out of them. And so
I'll definitely try to do that. That would be a lot of fun. I was just talking to somebody yesterday that I need the opposite advice. I need to stop trying to constantly work on my weaknesses and try things that are more challenging for me and lean into my strengths a little bit. It'd be really smart for me to do. And I just love so much leaning into the things that shouldn't be as hard for me as they are, or at least I think they shouldn't be as hard as they are. It's one of my favorite things in the world. So I need to, this coming season, that's what I'm going to do. Try to lean into my strengths a little more.
Yeah. And there's value in both, in both approaches. And I guess, again, it kind of depends where you're at in your climbing journey, where your mindset is at. And, my mindset is, there is kind of a sense of urgency here. I'm 58 and a half and, so the window is shrinking for my opportunity to take it up another notch or two. If that's going to happen, it's got to happen soon. And so, rule number 1, don't get injured. Rule number 2, train smart. Minimum effective dose type training.
Yep.
No overtraining, because recovery takes so long.
Yep.
So there's a lot of those kind of fundamental rules for older climbers. Nutrition and sleep is massively important.
So big.
With every year that passes by, when you're 20 years old, you can get away with a lot of nutrition, junk food, drinking, late nights. I mean, you're a little more. Not that I endorse that, for young athletes, if you want to be serious, you got to put it all together. But it's a fact you can get away with a lot when you're young. And, as you age, every decade, your body is slowing down and, the way you used to eat doesn't work anymore. And, honestly, the genesis of PhysiVantage was around 2014, let's say, the year that I turned 50. And I'm like, I need to kind of reinvent myself a little bit. My training, I need to, find some nutritional interventions, things that are going to help me as I age to recover faster. And, I was seeing I was becoming hypothyroid. I mean, I had not any major illnesses, but I had some issues, some shoulder issues, wear and tear of climbing for 40 years. And I'm like, I need to really, investigate what is going to keep me in the game for another 10 or 20 years. And this is back when I was 50. And so I started running into, reading a lot of research on, cutting edge topics, how to support collagen synthesis in your body and, how to maintain healthy tendons and joints and, how to recover faster and support hormone levels, all these things that change as you age. And that led me down this path of, finding meaningful science, when it comes to recovery aids and nutritional interventions, and that led me to developing these first few products and eventually PhysiVantage launching in 2019. So even though the company's only been around about 4 years, the genesis was 8 years ago, and it started off as a kind of a personal mission, just to find things that would help me. And then
I think that's how a lot of the best things start is, I need this thing. I'm going to figure out how to get this thing. And, there must be other people out there who want this thing too.
Yeah, exactly. And, and so I developed the first couple of products myself. They were in prototype for a couple of years. I used them, and then my sons started using them. And then I started sending them out to pro climbers like Matt Foltz, and he was using it and went on a tear, and then I'm like, okay, this stuff works. I ought to brand it and market it and make it available to all climbers. And hence PhysiVantage was born.
Yeah, smart and good timing for your career.
Yeah, that was all
for your
coincidence.
climbing.
I mean, it kind of makes me wonder if, there is kind of a, it's just those things in life that, happen seemingly coincidentally, but, they kind of line up, kind of a synchronicity to things.
Yeah. I think it's taking advantage of opportunities that present themselves, and.
Yeah. And here's the other thing, Chris, I had spent the previous 30 years writing about training for climbing, hundreds of articles and all these books and foreign translations. And so I had really proven myself in the community as a knowledgeable person, and I was involved in the research community. And so it gave me this perspective, because, the whole sports nutrition industry is viewed not so well by a lot of people because there is a lot of crap products out there. There's, a lot of fraudulent, questionable, let's say, products and claims for sure. And so I went into it knowing I needed to have science on my side if I was going to, launch a line of products. And, then using the reputation that I had built over all of those years in the climbing industry to launch the product. And so none of it was planned out. It just kind of evolved, organically. But as you said, that's often how the best things come to be.
Yeah, I think so. I'm curious with now that you have, you can essentially, if you want to call it this, be a full-time climber if you want to. Obviously, you're still working, but you can travel to where you want to be and climb. How does your training look now that you can be out there full time?
Yeah, that's a good question. And it's actually something that I can't completely answer because I'm still kind of figuring that out, Chris.
I think we all are.
Yeah, because, it's been since kind of this next phase of my life when I retired from the university job 2 years ago and kind of, have been able to focus entirely on PhysiVantage nutrition and on my climbing. And, again, mentioning that the kids are kind of out of the house and on their own, college age. So, I guess I'm a compulsive planner, so I still maintain a paper calendar or a wall calendar. I need to kind of see that laid out in front of me. It's really hard for me to use a phone calendar or something. And so I think 6 to 12 months in advance. Right now October, November is blocked out. Red River Gorge. You want to see me? Come to the Red. That's where I'm going to be. And then I knew I wanted to be in Wyoming for July because that's what we do most years. We spend, July in Wyoming. There's a, few places I'd rather be this time of year. And, and then I kind of fill in the blocks like that. And, okay, so I'm going to get home and I'm going to have August is going to be kind of a training block that probably extends into the first part of September. And then as the cold fronts start coming through and the, days get shorter and the air more crisp, I'll segue outside and, get ready for that October, November trip. And, and then maybe back home in December, another training block before perhaps January. We talked about Waco, or if not Waco, maybe, Red Rocks, Las Vegas area.
Yeah.
So I try to think out 6 or 12 months and plan out, a schedule that allows me to always circle back to training every 8 to 12 weeks. Because, even if I'm climbing a fair amount, say 3 or 4 days a week, I really do notice my strength wanes quickly when I'm on a trip.
Yeah,
I maintain that fitness well, but my strength wanes. And it's startling because I get home from a trip and I test myself and I'm like way down on like a lot of different metrics.
Yeah.
The good news is they come back quick, as most athletes discover, that you can regain those metrics pretty quickly if they're not lost for a long time.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of, rinse and repeat, through that cycle. And, all the while I am working a lot. It's not like if I am spending, July in Wyoming that I'm just on vacation for 30 days. I'm working every other day, putting in a full day, like a lot of people that are on the road. I mean, since COVID, I think probably half the people I run into at the Crags, like up at 10 Sleep or down in St. George this spring, more climbers than not were people that were, working remotely out of an Airbnb or out of a van. I mean, it's kind of the new normal.
Yeah.
And perhaps there's a lot of people listening to this that are shaking their head, they're able to embrace that lifestyle as well. And it does make it tougher to train for sure, because you are kind of mobile and you're traveling. But I think it's, for some people, a very rewarding way to do things, because you are able to satisfy your need for climbing and, that passion that we have, but also pay the bills and also, contribute to society, in a more meaningful way through their job or whatnot. And
I like that you build your calendar out thinking about the trips you want to do outside first. I think that's ideal for me. And I think it's a great way to keep your motivation up and, to have these goals in the future that you're training for. I think that's really important. Do you think, because there are so many people who are just, working out of an Airbnb in a climbing destination, is the 2-month trip or 2-month in an area, is that a time when we should consider keeping some of those strengths up? Maybe we are hangboarding every third day or something. And does that differ when you're 25 versus when you're 50?
Yeah, it definitely differs according to your age. And, to be honest, with the exception of the Red, there's nowhere that I would spend 2 months straight. Most climbing areas, honestly, if I'm there for 3 weeks, I kind of get a little tired of just
but a lot of folks do.
The climbing, the scene and stuff. And so, I tend to want to move on. Now, the Red will be a little different because having a cabin there, it'll be a new approach for me, kind of. And to answer your question, at the cabin, of course, I'm going to have a hangboard and a campus board and a small wall. And so not only can I get the perfect warm up before heading to the crag, which at older age is very, very important.
One of my favorite tactics.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure here in Lander, it's huge, to be able to warm up at home and then just go right to your project.
Yeah.
And at older age, you got to make every go count. If you waste a couple goes because you're not properly warmed up, well, that's the day, if you're an older climber. So so the Red, I'll have the tools to not only both warm up, but do, maybe a once weekly brief recruitment session just to get fully turned on. Because if you're route climbing and standing on your feet, it's just not the same as doing, a limit bouldering session or even doing a hangboard routine. And so I'm not a fan of people doing intensive training as part of their road trip, but done the right way, I think it can be helpful. And, even
I think it becomes especially important in areas like the red, where it's a very resistant style and you're doing very little really, really hard climbing or grabbing really small holds or anything like that.
Yeah, for sure. And yes, that's something that will be new for me, because up until this point, I've always visited the red for a few days or at most a couple of weeks, and then returned home. And
So exciting.
So this time I can kind of call the red my home. And it's funny, Chris, because as you know, I was one of the early developers at the New River Gorge in the 1980s and 90s, and did a couple hundred first ascents there. It's shocking that I actually am going to have a cabin at the red and not at the new. But and I love the new. I have so much sweat equity at the new, but the climbs there are I don't want to say harder, because the routes at the red are hard, but the routes at the new are hard in a different way. You have to do individual hard moves.
Definitely a more bouldery style.
Yeah, more it's like bouldering on a rope sometimes. And whereas the red, though it may have a few routes that are like that, is more more of a resistance area, and is a better fit for a climber my age. And so I will always return to the new for a couple of days of climbing each year, because I love the area. It's one of my favorite in the world. But again, getting back to the idea that I have this limited timeline, and if I'm going to put myself in a situation to win on the higher grade routes, then I need to cater to my strengths, which is kind of endurance climbing.
Yeah, I love it. Can you point to any specific things? And totally okay to say no, but I'm just curious if there are any things you've done over the last 4 to 5 years, maybe even more specifically these last couple of years, that you point to making you successful at climbing, that you've been climbing at a high level. So,
well, yeah, I mean, training wise, honestly, I'm doing pretty much the same stuff now that I was doing 5 or 10 years ago. It's always being tweaked to be right for where I'm at, physically. But my program is largely unchanged the last decade. The one big difference is my approach to climbing at the crags, and specifically how long I'll put in to working a route. And that change coincides with my retirement from my university job.
Having more time.
Where prior to that, with a job 9 months of the year, kind of a standard 9 to 5 kind of job, and a family, and all the other things that I'm very engaged in a lot of activities. I'm a man of many passions, and so it was just a very busy time of my life, from like age 30 to age 55, and when I would go climbing, I would want to send routes, so whether it was a 2-day trip to the new, or a 5-day trip to the red, or a 3-week trip to Wyoming, or whatnot, I wanted to do routes I could send. Well, that means you're obviously shooting below your absolute limit, and I'm picking routes that I can either on-site or do in a few goes, and camping under a route for days and days, no way. I'm not going to do that if I have such limited time. And I think that's a mistake a lot of climbers make, because they're seeking that higher grade, which I respect, but they have such an urgency that they invest so much time, and maybe they send, maybe they don't. But I see a lot of anxiety in people, a lot of frustration, and even lost love of climbing sometimes, because they get so stressed over the proj. And it's like, take a break, dial it back, do some routes you can set. I mean, second going is a really gratifying way to climb, because you have no pressure on the first go. You're kind of going up there, sussing it out, just being a scientist about figuring out the route. What is the beta? And then trying to second go it, and if you don't second go, you third go it. And that's what I did for years. And I found it was challenging, but I would send frequently enough that it was gratifying. There's nothing worse than, going on a long trip somewhere and coming home like with nothing. And I see so many climbers do that. And it's kind of sad. Like I see climbers come into the red for a week and they camp out under a route that's, over their head or at their extreme limit, and they don't send it and they go home. And I'm like, I think to myself, what a shame. They were just at one of the world's best climbing areas, and they could have dialed it back 2 letter grades and sent some routes that are world class and had a ball. But instead they suffered on, something that was at their extreme limit. And, everybody's got to find the recipe for what works for them. And, for me, it wasn't to put myself into this, mode of failing most of the time. Now, things are a little different. I have more time on my hands. At least I don't have to be at the university 9 months of the year. So I can travel a little more and dedicate a little more time. And so to finally circle back to answering your question, the change that I've made the last couple of years is to actually work on routes longer. And so, I first set out to climb a 13C, which I did, 2 seasons ago, a route called Angry Birds, which I'm sure you know.
Yep.
It's not a pushover by any stretch. It's actually kind of my anti-style because it has 2 boulder problem cruxes on it. But it requires a fair amount of endurance as well. And I did it in 4, maybe 5 days, so I kind of surprised myself. Wow, I can do that if I just put a couple of days into something. Taking it up a notch, what if I put 10 days into a route this fall, which probably it'll take for me to, to do, I don't know, ultra perm or, something like that. We'll see. That story is yet to be written, but the one change to answer your question is to actually put a little more time into working routes when I find the right route.
Sure.
That being said, I was just in rifle and 10 sleep, and I didn't spend more than really a day on anything because I had a week. I wanted to send some routes in a week, so I dialed things back and, kind of climbed, closer to my second go limit, let's say.
Yep. I think it's important when you go on a trip to know what you want out of it. And, if you want to send routes, then working at your absolute limit isn't the way to go. If you just want to go and climb on one route and that's what makes you happy, great. I think you should, And I would do that like maybe 1 out of every 5 or 6 trips that I would go on when I was a weekend warrior. And I would keep my projects at home in a place where I was going regularly,
Right.
know.
And that makes sense.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Your home area
for me, that worked.
Your home area where you can have, quick access and frequent visits to, if you're going to project something at your limit, maybe that's where it should be. And then when you travel, like, if you're going to go to Europe for a few weeks, why just park yourself under one route? Why not check out some amazing areas that you might not get back to, who knows? And so that's a message I've tried to share with all the climbers I work with, and certainly with my sons, that, there's value in both, and, both approaches, I guess you need to be able to, alternate, perhaps, I guess is the word, between the 2 approaches.
Yeah, I agree.
Like you do have to sometimes stretch your limits, and that means picking out something that you're going to fail on a lot.
Yeah.
That was one of the things that, Todd Skinner was a big proponent of is, you got to set the bar high and, kick it to darkness till it bleeds daylight.
Yeah, you don't really know where your limits are until you try to push into them.
But if that's all you do, then, then it becomes a sufferfest.
Did you ever have those kinds of projects that took longer than your usual when you were climbing in the new a lot way back in the day, like around Diamond Lifetime? Did you have big projects then? I
was so into just route development. There was about a half a dozen of us, Mike Arts, Eddie Bagoon, Doug Reed, Porter Gerard, myself, Rick Thompson, Kenny Parker, a few others. And it was kind of like there was a few years where you would walk out to the crags and there'd be multiple drills going. It was kind of this golden age of development that lasted 5 seasons. So to find one, at or beyond the limit route and park under it, it's like, wow, I'll miss out on putting up all these great routes. So I think a lot of us we were all picking routes that were within our capabilities.
Sure.
And so Diamond Life was at my limit, but it was, I had climbed a lot of 512Ds at many areas around the country. So I was ready for that 513A breakthrough back in 1987.
Right.
And so I just happened to find the right piece of stone. And I think it might have been a 3-day type commitment, so it wasn't that huge of a commitment. And, honestly, back then I didn't work on routes more than a couple of days, because I wanted to move on to the next route. And so it was kind of, we were all out there, searching for Easter eggs, who's going to put up the great arête over here or the big roof there. And, it was a really fun period. But none of us pushed the boundaries all that far. In 1989, so 2 years after Diamond Life, I think the hardest route at that time was 13B. I think Doug Reed and I had both put up 13Bs at the new. And then Scott Franklin shows up and puts up Mango Tango, which he graded 13D, and it's now widely accepted as solid 14A. And so he just came in and just in our face showed us that we weren't climbing that hard. And some of that was self-imposed because, again, we were just on this, we were involved in this golden age of route development, and none of us picked out a line and worked on it for a long time. But also Scott was just so much better and stronger than us. I mean, he was on a different level. Yeah,
absolutely. Outlier for sure.
Yeah.
So now that you are, leaning into this multiple day project, is Angry Birds the longest project at this point?
No, after doing Angry Birds, my next route that I started working on was Silky Smooth, which I'm sure you're familiar with. Yeah. And so I put in 8 days on that, almost sent, and then I got a little bit of a pulley tweak. And if you remember that route, it's basically a crimp ladder. It's just crimp. And
it's like a steeper version of the Undertow.
Yeah. And so, you're on first pad for 90 feet for the most part. There's one semi-rest at a little over halfway, which I red pointed to multiple times, so all the hardest climbing's behind you at that point. You just have to survive, a 12B crimp fest to the anchors. And I just couldn't get enough back at the rest to make it through that last, run to the anchors. So it was a little bit of a fitness test. It was kind of a little bit of a mystery why I couldn't send it. I was kind of 8 days in, and then, 8 days, maybe over 2 weeks. And then I started to feel a little bit classic, tenderness on the A2 pulley. And I'm like, okay, be smart. This project's not going away, and so it got kicked to this season. So hopefully this fall, that'll be the first thing I go to.
Yeah. I think, tactics like that, multiple day project tactics are one of those important things that if you were to stick to the approach constantly of only second go, third go sending, you miss out on a little bit. I think that's why I like the having a project at home once in a while on a trip, try something hard, because then you're sort of stress testing your tactics, and you get a bigger, just like climbing skills, you get a bigger bag of tactics that you can pull from when you encounter a situation where it's a bit of a mystery. It's still going to be a bit of a mystery sometimes. That's just how climbing is. You think you should send, and you're falling at the same move over and over.
Yeah, and it's funny. I felt so close to sending Silky Smooth, but yet it was so far. It's kind of one of those mysteries. And I was being really scientific about it. I was shooting video of every attempt, and I was breaking down the route and the movement and how I could be a little more efficient. And, and I think after all of that, I've concluded it's kind of, I need to figure out how to rest better. I don't know if you remember the rest hold there, but it's it's a tight squeeze. You can't really get two hands into it. You can get 1.5 hand of your, you can get 6 fingers. So how are you doing that if you're getting 6 fingers in? Right. I think people with really small hands, kids and maybe some ladies can get 2 full hands there, and then it's kind of a different game. But for an adult male hands or female hands, maybe they're too big. And for me, it's about 6 fingers. And so you're on a 30-degree overhanging wall with 6 fingers. How do you rest effectively there? What is your, how are you? I'm trying to piano my fingers in and out and get, both hands to recover. And, there's nothing to knee on, and, you can't hand jam. And like I'm going to all the tricks in the book, trying to think, how can I make this rest better? And I haven't really figured it out. So I think I just need a little more fitness. And
is that one of the goals for this trip to the Red?
What's that?
Silky smooth?
Yeah, that'll be the first thing I go back to. I mean, the other thing that's tricky about it is it gets really strong sun.
Yep.
It gets quite warm there. So even on a cool day, it can be almost too hot. And the problem I had is in the sun, your feet are always stepping up into the shadow of your body.
Mm-hmm.
So your eyes are kind of blown out by the brightness of the wall, but then you can't see your feet. And there's, it's all small, it's very technical, foot placements. You just aren't dropping them on the jugs, like you are maybe on Undertow Wall or on Madness Cave. You're really edging on little features that you need to see and align your foot properly. And so there's a visual issue when there's sun on it, but then, it can also, if it's in the shade, be quite cold back there. And so, I was having issues with the conditions as well, getting just, the right time to be on the route. So again, I guess if I'm living locally there for a month or two, hopefully I can pick the days and times to get out there and hopefully take care of business.
Yeah.
So my hope would be that I could take care of that early in my fall visit and then start working on something else.
Awesome. Are you going to start looking for the big project? Or?
Well, I think I need a stepping stone. So we talked about my need to do harder moves in Boulder. So I think Ultra Perm might be the route because you have some
great one. Yeah.
Yeah. You have some good resistance climbing up to a boulder.
Yep.
And then resistance climbing again to the anchor. And I got on it a couple of times when my sons did Southern Smoke a few years ago. And so they kind of share some of the top climbing. And so at that time I thought, what the heck, I'll get on and feel it up. And I can climb the route except for basically 2 moves. I need to figure out how to do that 2-move boulder.
Cool.
And so,
for most people I know, half of the crux of Ultra Perm is just figuring out your beta, because there's so many options and so many holds and body positions you could cycle through to try a section. So if you've done all but 2 of them, I think you're in good position. So I'm psyched to see how your October, November goes out there. And I've been really motivated by watching you send things lately and crush things. And it's really good to see, knowing that, that's possible for me coming up.
100%, and I mean, I guess the most important thing is we have to believe, that it can still happen, because, the one thing that absolutely closes the door, even more than injury, is, if you have disbelief in a goal or disbelief in something. And so, I can believe in Silky Smooth, and I think I can believe in Ultra Perm. And, I've had some people say, well, what about 14A? Because I've climbed all these years and I've never projected a 14A. And I can't say 100% believe in it, because, I have that desire, but I guess I'm also enough of a coach to know I need to build that foundation. And well, I guess I could jump from Angry Birds to sending a 14A. I think that's probably unlikely. I think it's more likely I need to, have a few more, more bricks in place there.
Yeah, there's plenty of those stepping stones out there.
Yeah, for sure. Not in Wild Iris though.
It's definitely harder in Wild Iris. I'm feeling like I did this whole thing backwards. I should be going back to the Red right about now instead of climbing out here.
Yeah.
So.
Although I think there's some people, certainly the strong young boulders, who might think, Wild Iris grades are easier than Red River Gorge grades.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because some people get on the red routes and think they're so hard. But again, it all comes back to what your strengths and weaknesses are.
Yeah,
and
totally.
For the aging coach Hörst, it's definitely those resistance routes are where the money's at. So
Well, I'm excited to see how it goes for you.
Yeah.
Man, thanks for taking the time to sit down. I know everybody's got a busy week out here,
Yeah.
and I saw you were in town and just wanted to catch up.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, I'm
thanks.
happy to do it. It's long overdue. I think it's probably been 3 years maybe since I
Yeah.
was last on your podcast.
Maybe
and-
longer. I think you were one of my earliest episodes. So,
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, we should do it more frequently.
Yeah. Let's do
But
that.
and I want to congratulate you. All you've done in the industry and with your business
Thanks.
and everything is very, very impressive. And it's like I joke to people, but it's also true. I think there's more training, knowledge, and expertise in Lander, Wyoming, per capita
Yeah.
than anywhere else in the world.
Yeah.
you know, because it seems like just like if you want to be, if you're a strong young climber, you move to Salt Lake, and if you're an aging strong
Yep.
coach, you move to Lander.
Absolutely.
So
That's the way
I
it
need to find a
goes.
piece of land here, I think.
Well, we'll see you out here soon then. Thanks, Eric.
You're welcome.
You know, I'm a pretty self-motivated person when it comes to my climbing, but it's always nice to hear from someone else about their experiences in the terrain that I'll be encountering. And at 48, I'm about a decade or so behind Eric, and he's proof that being smart about my training will mean that I can climb hard for many more years. Eric, I appreciate you stopping by and chatting, and I'm sure I'll see you again soon. We're rooting for you out in the red. In your show notes, you'll find links to find Eric online, his website, podcast, social media, books, so much there. You have to check it out. You'll also find a link to my course, Coaching for Mastery, which you should check out if you're interested in helping climbers improve. The Power Company Podcast is brought to you by Power Company Climbing. You can learn, grow, and excel with us at powercompanyclimbing.com, where you'll find links to the Power Company Climbing Academy and the Knowledge and Community Hub. We're on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube at Power Company Climbing. But as you know, not the Twitters, because we don't tweet. We scream like eagles.
Maybe don't know.
This time, this time, this time, this time, this time to build. This time to build. This time to build. This time, this time to build. This time to build. This time to build. This time, power, power. This time to build, power. This time to build, power. This time to build, power. This time to build 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 power. This time to build. 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 This time.
Cause Jah is the sinister character.
Audio.